Hey guys, this is Allison from Allykatkreations. How are you? I'm hanging in. So I was looking through my metaphysical books to see if I can start reading content that I really resonate with on a big scale, changed my life. And I was wanting to read Aristotle's Metaphysics, but come to find out Aristotle's words aren't his own because you can't read it outright, at least the version that I own. I find that a significant issue. I get that people translate things, I get it, but there should be some things that should just be open source, like Aristotle. So I have to be on the hunt now for Aristotle's Metaphysics, because it's very important to read, that I can actually share and quote from, because this one you can't even quote from. I'm like getting, if I wrote a book, I'm writing it to pass knowledge out, not for greed. And granted, I don't make anything by doing this. I am not monetized. I don't really get anything from anybody. I'm doing this out of the pureness of spreading knowledge. The fact of the matter is, if I wrote a book, freaking share the shit out of it. You want to read what other people share. Like, if you resonate with a book, buy it. Sometimes people don't have the money. I know that a lot of people don't have the money. I have a lot of books, and a lot of them I can't share. Because, goodness gracious, people have, I don't know. I don't agree with it. I'm not a person of greed. I really don't need much. I just need to be able to sustain in this third density hellhole until we make it to fourth. And that's not from some time now. Either way, I found something I can read. It's short, so I'm going to split it up into the 3 sections that it's in. It's Fundamental Principles of the Metaphysics of Morals by Immanuel Kant. Some authors I can't even read on here because it's fluff tube, as Nina Rodriguez would say. Yes, I really am starting to have a problem with, I get that people want, they invest a lot of time and effort into writing books, charging $12.99, and then it's cut in millions of different ways. And by the time you see the little shred of money that you get, I get it. That's how people make money. That's how they make a living. I don't take away from that whatsoever. But when you're translating Aristotle, Ptolemy, Plato, any one of them, Pythagoras, their knowledge should be open sourced and for all to read. Like, I think I know a lot of people are like shaking their heads like, yeah, that should be like out there. And I get it. You translated it. Congratulations. And so has 1,000 other people. Why can't anybody source anything off of your book or even read anything? And again, with the author's authorization, the authors is Aristotle. You just translated it. Anyway, I'm like getting really over the book thing, and I don't mind reading something again or going over sections and saying it in my own terms, But again, I really feel on so many things, you need the source from the horse's mouth, because that's in essence the truest version of what it is that you're getting, the information, the knowledge. It's not watered down. And not to say that anything coming from me is a watered down version of anything, but I really feel when I read, I want to hear it from the source itself. And I've heard people, really well established people, break down a lot of metaphysicians and existentialists and all types of metaphysics. I've heard them and they're really excellent and I give them props for it. I'm not on that level. I don't have a PhD in metaphysics. I just love it. That's just me. Also, before I begin, note, I'm getting creepy people on Telegram and some other places. Oh, you're so sexy. Oh, I'm looking at your photo. Oh, are you now? Congratulations. And I can read your intention. And I know what you're thinking. So look, you're free to do with whatever image in your mind you would like to do with. None of my business. But I'm not interested. As much as I would love a relationship, not with strangers who right off the bat is thinking those things. If I could get, and I would love to do this, by the way, like how to approach someone in that reads books and has intellect and is knowledgeable about a lot of things, how to approach somebody that actually is well read than somebody off the street just looking for a good time. There's ways of approaching a woman and a man, by the way. It's neither here or there. A person in general. Just be mindful. Certain people can do it, like myself. I can read intentions right away off the bat. Because the same lines keep coming up all the time. When everybody starts treating each other with integrity and respect, and not because of what they look like or what fetish you think you can put up in your mind, keep that to yourself and keep that private. But when you talk to me, I know where your intentions lie. And also, I don't mind helping people find answers to any kind of information when I have time to do so. But it's, again, like, do your research, look for it. I don't have scribed where a lot of people do. I go to offshoot stuff and I make sense out of things. But, you know, I've been getting asked and the intention is off. So, and this is not there's a few people that do it. Look, I don't have all the answers either. Jason doesn't have all the answers. I can do what I can try and what I can recall at the moment. But research. And if you can't get something, it's always welcome to ask. But some people, you know, don't seem to want to even do much. And I'm not pointing anybody out. It's been going on for a few months. It's just something that we all have to do. I urge everybody who listens to me to read the books. Obviously, a lot of people don't have the time to read a Wasp, it's huge, or Urantia, it's huge. The smaller books, like the Emerald Tablets is really tiny. Read it. There's a lot of books that don't take that much time to read. Whether you're on a bus or you're right before you go to sleep, you read a chapter. It's not a bad idea to refocus your mind. You got to do your own work. I tell a lot of my friends this on the spiritual level as well. I get a lot of people that ask me, well, how do I do that? What resonates with you? What do you mean? How do you do that? I'll tell you how I do it, but that might not work for you. Read, investigate, go on the internet. That's why it's there. It's not the best place to get everything, but read, look around. You can't get all the answers all the time. When I asked High Vibes Up for that quantum healing, is because I tried cleansing, shielding, clearing my space, meditating, guided meditation, binaural beats. I did a plethora of things, and it was more than like a day. It was months of doing my work, figuring out that there was a block somewhere, and that then I needed help because I can't undo it myself. There are people that have different abilities than I do that can clear and make things work. Here's my co-host. My co-host has not been with me all day. So I just want to put that out there. It's not to take away from anybody. It's not to call anybody out. That's not the purpose. I just want to make sure that people know that like 40 is coming, and it's coming quick. The energies, at least. We're not zipping anywhere, I don't think, for a while. But we have to start being able to hone in for ourselves. Before, it's like when I was working with the kids, I would always say, ask 3 before you ask me. And that's 3 of their same age group. Ask 3 friends before you come to an adult to help, for help. And I say the same thing to some of you guys. Look in 3 places. If you can't find it, then ask somebody, right? Like, there's no harm in that. And again, I don't mind answering or trying to figure something out for somebody, but like put some effort into doing it. Like it's the intention that I feel from some people, it's like a demand. Well, I'm not getting paid. Right? And yes, I have time, but I'm also trying to figure out my life because I'm the only one that could do that for myself. No one's helping me financially. No one's feeding me. I haven't had a food donation in about a month. Thankfully, 2 people helped me out severely last month, so I'm okay. But you know, I have to figure my life out too. And that takes time. And trying to find a job because, you know, I've been asking, no one's been calling. So I just want to put that out there. It's not, again, I'm not here to disrespect anybody and not to off-put anybody, but, you know, just what happened on what I just received was very off-putting to me. And I'm then thinking about, you know, when I was looking for what book to read, and I'm going and thinking about a lot of things and just how people have no decency to say, oh, thank you. Or when you have the time, I tried looking into this. I didn't see, you know, I couldn't find what I was looking for. Maybe you can help me search or direct me in the right direction. You know, maybe wording things in a more humbling way might be where the issue is, where I'm picking it up, that it's off. I don't know. Just putting that out there. It needed to be said. Immanuel Kant. First, and again, she's going to do her own thing, Miss co-host here, Miss Morgan. So don't mind me. I'm sorry for the rant. I had to get that off my chest and put it out into the ether, so it's out there. Maybe people will reword things when they write to me, so I don't feel like I'm being taken advantage of, or like I'm not worthy of having a please and a thank you. First section, transition from the common rational knowledge of morality to the philosophical. Maybe that's why I got pulled and able to read this book. Nothing can possibly be conceived in the world, or even out of it, which can be called good without justification, except a good will, intelligence, wit, judgment, and other talents of the mind, however they may be named, or courage, resolution, perseverance, as qualities of temperament, are undoubtedly good and desirable in many respects. But these gifts of nature may also become extremely bad and mischievous if the will, which is to make use of them, and which therefore constitutes what is called character, is not good. It is the same with the gifts of fortune, power, riches, honor, even health, and the general well-being and contentment with one's condition, which is called happiness, inspire pride and often presumption, if there is not a good will to correct the influence of these on the mind, and with these also to rectify the whole principle of acting and adapt it to its end. The sight of a being who is not adorned with a single feature of a pure and good will, enjoying unbroken prosperity, can never give pleasure to an impartial, rational spectator. Thus, a good will appears to constitute the indispensable condition even of being worthy of happiness. There are even some qualities which are of service to this good will itself and may facilitate its action, yet which have no intrinsic unconditional value, but always presuppose a good will. And this qualifies the esteem that we justly have for them, and does not permit us to regard them as absolutely good. Moderation in the affections and passions, self-control, and calm deliberation are not only good in many respects, but even seem to constitute part of the intrinsic worth of the person. But they are far from deserving to be called good without qualification, although they have been so unconditionally praised by the ancients. For without the principles of a good will, they may become extremely bad, and the coolness of a villain not only makes him far from dangerous, but also directly makes him more admirable in our eyes than he would have been without it. A good will is good not because of what it performs or affects, not by its aptness for attainment of some proposed end, but simply by virtue of the volition. That is, it is good in itself, and considered by itself is to be esteemed much higher than all that can be brought about by it in favor of any inclination, nay, even of the sum total of all inclinations, even if it should happen that, owing to special disfavor of fortune or the provision of stepmotherly nature, this should wholly lack power to accomplish its purpose. If with its greatness efforts, it should yet achieve nothing, and there should remain only the good will, not to be sure or mere wish, but the summoning of all means in our power. Then like a jewel, it would still shine by its own light as a thing which has its own value in itself. It's useless or fruitless, can neither add to nor take away anything from this value. It would be, as it were, only the setting to enable us to handle it the more conveniently in common commerce, or in attract to it the attention of those who are not yet connoisseurs, but not to recommend it to true connoisseurs, or to determine its value. There is, however, something so strange in this idea of the absolute value of the mere will, in which no account is taken of its utility, notwithstanding the thorough assent of even common reason to the idea, yet a suspicion must arise that it may perhaps really be the product of mere high-flown fancy, and that we may have misunderstood the purpose of nature in assigning reason as the governor of our will. Therefore, we will examine the idea from the point of view. In the physical constitution of an organized being, that is, a being adapted suitably to the purposes of life, we assume it as a fundamental principle that no organ for any purpose will be found, but what is also the fittest and best adapted for that purpose. Now, in a being which has reason and will, if the proper object of nature were its conservation, its welfare, in a word, its happiness, then nature would have hit upon a very bad arrangement in selecting the reason of the creature to carry out this purpose. For all the actions which the creature has to perform with the view to its purpose, and the whole rule of its conduct would be far more surely prescribed to it by instinct, and that end would have been obtained thereby much more certainly than it ever can be by reason. Should reason have been communicated to this favored creature over and above, it must only have served it to contemplate the happy constitution of its nature, to admire it, to congratulate itself thereon, and to feel thankful for it to the beneficent cause, but not that it should subject its desires to that weak and delusive guidance, and meddled begrudgingly with the purpose of nature. In a word, nature would have taken care that reason should not break forth into practical exercise, nor have the presumption with its weak insight to think out for itself the plan of happiness, and out of means of obtaining it. Nature would not only have taken on herself the choice of the ends, but also of the means, and with wise foresight would have entrusted both to instinct. And in fact, we have found that the more a civilized reason applies itself with the deliberate purpose to the enjoyment of life and happiness, so much the more does the man fail of true satisfaction. And from this circumstance, there arises in many, if they are candid enough to confess it, a certain degree of misology that in itself hatred of reason, especially in the case of those who are most experienced in the use of it, because after calculating all the advantages they derive, I do not say from the invention of all the arts of common luxury, but even from the sciences which seem to them to be, after all, only a luxury of the understanding, they find that they have, in fact, only brought more trouble on their shoulders rather than gained in happiness. And they end by envying rather than despising the more common stamp of man, who keep closer to the guidance of mere instinct and do not allow their reason much influence on their conduct. And this we must admit, that the judgment of those who would very much lower the lofty eulogies of the advantage which reason gives us in regard to the happiness and satisfaction of life, who would even reduce them below zero, is by no means morose or ungrateful to the goodness with which the world is governed, but there lies at the root of these judgments the idea that our existence has a different and far nobler end, for which, and not for happiness, reason is properly intended and must therefore be regarded as supreme condition to which the private ends of man must for the most part be postponed. For as reason is not content to guide the will with certainty in regard to its subject, the satisfaction of all our wants, which it to some extent even multiplies, this being as an end to which an implanted instinct would have led with much greater certainty, and since nevertheless reason is imparted to us as a practical faculty, as one which is to have influence on the will, therefore admitting the nature generally in distribution of her capacities has adapted the means to the end. Its true destination must be to produce a will, not merely good as a means to something else, but good in itself, for which reason was absolutely necessary. This will then, though not indeed the sole and complete good, must be the supreme good and the condition of every other, even of the desire of happiness. Under these circumstances, there is nothing inconsistent with the wisdom of nature in the fact that the cultivation of the reason, which is requisite for the first and unconditional purpose, does in many ways interfere, at least in this life, with the attainment of the second, which is always conditional, namely happiness. Nay, it may even reduce it to nothing without nature, thereby failing all her purpose. For reasons recognizes the establish of a good will as its highest practical destination, and in obtaining this purpose is capable only of satisfaction of its own proper kind, namely that from the attainment of an end, which end again is determined by reason only, notwithstanding that this may involve many a disappointment to the ends of inclination. We have then to develop the notion of a will, which deserves to be highly esteemed for itself and is good without a view to anything further, a notion which exists already in the sound natural understanding, requiring rather to be cleared up than to be taught, in which in estimating the value of our actions always takes the first place and constitute the condition of all the rest. In order to do this, we will take the notion of duty, which includes that of a good will, although implying certain subjective restrictions and hindrances. These, however, far from concealing it or rendering it unrecognizable, rather bring it out by contrast and make it shine forth so much the brighter. I omit here all actions which are already recognized as inconsistent with duty, although they may be useful for this or that purpose. For with these, the question whether they are done from duty cannot arise at all, since they even conflict with it. I also set aside those actions which really conform to duty, but to which men have no direct inclination performing them, because they are impelled thereto by some other inclination. For in this case, we can readily distinguish whether the action which agrees with the duty is done from duty or from a selfish view. It is much harder to make this distinction when the action accords with duty and the subject has besides a direct inclination to it. For example, it is always a matter of duty that a dealer should not overcharge an inexperienced purchaser, and whenever there is much commerce, the prudent tradesman does not overcharge, but keeps a fixed price for everyone, so that a child buys of him as well as any other. Man are also thus honestly served, but this is not enough to make us believe that the tradesman has so acted from duty and from principles of honesty. His own advantage required it. It is out of the question in this case to suppose that he might besides have a direct inclination in favor of the buyers, so that as it were from love, he should give no advantage to one over another. Accordingly, the action was done neither from duty nor from direct inclination, but merely with a selfish view. On the other hand, it is a duty to maintain one's life, and in addition, everyone has also a direct inclination to do so. But on this account, the often anxious care which most men take for it as no intrinsic worth, and their maxim has no moral import. They preserve their life as duty requires, no doubt, but not because duty requires. On the other hand, if adversary in hopeless sorrow have completely taken away the relish for life, if the unfortunate one, strong in mind, indignant at his fate, rather than desponding or dejected, wishes for death, and yet preserves his life without loving it, not from inclination or fear, but from duty, then his maxim has a moral worth. To be beneficent when we can is a duty, and besides this, there are many minds so sympathetically constituted that without any other motive of vanity or self-interest, they find a pleasure in spreading joy around them and can take delight in the satisfaction of others, so far as it is their own work. But I maintain that in such a case, an action of this kind, however proper, however admirable it may be, has nevertheless no true moral worth, but is on a level with other inclinations. The inclination to honor which, if it is happily directed to that which is in fact of public utility and accordant with duty, and consequently honorable, deserves praise and encouragement, but not esteem. For the maxim lacks the moral import, namely that such actions be done from duty, not from inclination. But put the case that the mind of the philanthropist were clouded by sorrow of his own, extinguishing all sympathy with the lot of the others, and that while he still has the power to benefit others in distress, he is not touched by their trouble because he is absorbed with his own. And now suppose that he tears himself out of this dead insensibility and performs the action without any inclination to do it, but simply from duty. Then first, his action is genuine moral worth. Further still, if nature has put little sympathy in the heart of this or that man, if he supposed to be an upright man, is by temperament cold and indifferent to the sufferings of others, perhaps because in respect of his own, he is provided with the special gift of patience and fortitude, and supposes or even requires that others should have the same, and such a man would certainly not be the meanest product of nature. But if nature had not specially framed him for a philanthropist, would he not still find himself a source from whence to give himself a far higher worth than that of a good-natured temperament could be? Unquestionably. It is just in this that the moral worth of the character is brought out, which is incomparably the highest of all, namely that he is beneficent, not from inclination, but from duty. To secure one's own happiness is a duty, at least indirectly, for discontent with one's condition under a pressure of many anxieties and amidst unsatisfied wants might easily become a great temptation to transgression of duty. But here again, without looking to duty, all men have already the strongest and most intimate inclination to happiness, because it is just in this idea that all inclinations are combined in one total. But the precept of happiness is often of such a sort that it greatly interferes with some inclinations, and yet a man cannot form any definite and certain conception of the sum of satisfaction of all of them, which is called happiness. It is not then to be wondered at that a single inclination, definite both, as to what it promises and as to the time within which it can be gratified, is often able to overcome such a fluctuating idea, and that a gouty patient, for instance, can choose to enjoy what he likes and to suffer what he may, since according to his calculation on this occasion at least, he has only not sacrificed the enjoyment of the present moment to a possibly mistaken expectation of a happiness which is supposed to be found in health. But even in this case, if the general desire for happiness did not influence his will, and supposing that in his particular case health was not a necessary element in this calculation, there yet remains in this, as in other cases, the law, namely, that he should promote his happiness not from inclination but from duty, and by this would his conduct first acquire true moral worth. It is in this manner undoubtedly that we are understand those passages of scripture also in which we are commanded to love our neighbor, even our enemy. For love as an affection cannot be commanded, but benefits for duty's sake, even though we are not impelled to do it by any other inclination, nay, or even repelled by a natural and unconquerable aversion. This is practical love and not pathological, a love which is seated in the will and not in the propensions of sense, in principles of action and not of tender sympathy. And it is this love alone which can be commanded. The second proposition is that an action done from duty derives its moral worth, not from the purpose which it is to be obtained by it, but from the maxim by which it is determined, and therefore does not depend on the realization of the object of the action, but merely on the principle of volition by which the action has taken place, without regard to any object of desire. It is clear from what precedes that the purposes which we may have in view in our actions or their effects regarded as ends and springs of the will cannot give to actions any unconditional or moral worth. In what then can their worth lie, if it is not to consist in the will and in reference to its expected effect? It cannot lie anywhere but in the principle of the will, without regard to the ends which we can obtain by the action. For the will stands between its a priori principle, which is formal, and its a posteriori spring, which is material, as being two roads, and it must be determined by something. It follows that it must determine by the formal principle of volition when an action is done from duty, in which case every material principle has been withdrawn from it. The third proposition, which is a consequence of the two preceding, I would express thus: duty is the necessity of acting from respect for the law. I may have an inclination for an object as the effect of my proposed action, but I cannot have respect for it just for this reason, that it is an effect and not an energy of will. Similarly, I cannot have respect for inclination, whether my own or another's. I can at most, if my own, approve it, if another sometimes even love it, look on it as favorable to my own interest. It is only that is connected with my will as a principle, by no means as an effect, what does not subserve my inclination but overpowers it, or at least in case of choice excludes it from its calculation. In other words, simply the law of itself, which can be an object of respect and hence a command. Now an action done from duty must wholly exclude the influence of inclination, and with it every object of the will, so that nothing remains which can determine the will except objectively the law, and subjectively pure respect for this practical law and consequently the maxim that I should follow this law even in the thwarting of all my inclinations. Thus, the moral worth of an action does not lie in the effect expected from it, nor in any principle of action which requires to borrow its motive from this expected effect. For all these effects, agreeableness of one's condition, and even the promotion of the happiness of others, could have been so brought about by other causes, so that for this there would have been no need of the will of a rational being, whereas it is in this alone that the supreme and unconditional good can be found. The preeminent good, which we call moral, can therefore consist in nothing else than the conception of law in itself, which certainly is only possible in a rational being, insofar as this conception and not the expected effect determines the will. This is a good which is already present in the person who acts accordingly, and we have not to wait for it to appear first in the result. But what sort of law can that be, the conception of which must determine the will, even without paying any regard to the effect expected from it, in order that this will may be called good absolutely and without qualification, as I derived the will of every impulse which could arise to it from obedience to any law, there remains nothing but the universal conformity of its actions to law in general, which alone is to serve the will as a principle. I am never to act otherwise than so that I could also will that my maxim should become a universal law. Here now is the simple conformity to law in general, without assuming any particular law applicable to certain actions, that serves the will as its principle and must to serve it, if duty is not to be a vain delusion and a chimerical notion. The common reason of men in its practical judgments perfectly coincides with this, and always has in view the principles here suggested. Let the question be, for example, may I, when in distress, make a promise with the intention not to keep it? I readily distinguish here between the two significations which the question may have, whether it is prudent or whether it is right to make a false promise. The former may undoubtedly often be the case. I see clearly, indeed, that it is not enough to extricate myself from a present difficulty by means of this centrifuge, but it must be well considered whether there may be not hereafter spring from this lie much greater inconvenience than that from which I now free myself. And as with all my supposed cunning, the consequences cannot be so easily foreseen, but that credit once lost may be much more injurious to me than any mischief which I seek to avoid at present, it should be considered whether it would not be more prudent to act herein according to a universal maxim, and to make it a habit to promise nothing except with the intention of keeping it. But it is soon clear to me that such a maxim will still only be based on fear of consequences. Now it is a wholly different thing to be truthful from duty, and to be so from apprehension of injurious consequences. In the first case, the very notion of action already implies a law for me. In the second case, I must first look about elsewhere to see what results may often be combined with it, which would affect myself. For to deviate from the principle of the duty is beyond all doubt wicked, but to be unfaithful to my maxim of prudence may often be very adventurous to me, although to abide by it is certainly safer. The shortest way, however, and an unerring one, to discover the answer to the question whether I lying promise to consist with duty is to ask myself, should I be content that my maxim, to extricate myself from difficulty by a false promise, should hold good as a universal law for myself as well as for others? And should I be able to say to myself, quote, everyone may make a deceitful promise when he finds himself in a difficulty from which he cannot otherwise extricate himself, end quote. Then I presently become aware that while I can will the lie, I can by no means will that lying should be a universal law, for which such a law there would be no promises at all, since it would be in vain to allege my intention in regard to my future actions to those who would not believe this allegation, or if they over hastily did so, would pay me back in my own coin. Hence my maxim, soon as it should be made a universal law, would necessarily destroy itself. I do not therefore need any far-reaching penetration to discern what I have to do in order that my will may be morally good. Inexperience in the course of the world, incapable of being prepared for all its contingencies, I only ask myself, canst thou also will that thy maxim should be a universal law? If not, then it must be rejected, and that not because of a disadvantage occurring from it to myself or even to others, but because it cannot enter as a principle into a possible universal legislation, and reason extorts from me immediate respect for such legislation. I do not indeed as yet discern on what this respect is based. This philosopher may inquire, but at least I understand this, that it is an estimation of worth which far outweighs all worth of what is recommended by inclination, and that the necessity of acting from pure respect from the practical law is what constitutes duty, to which every other motive must give place, because it is the condition of the will, being good in itself, and the worth of such a will is above everything. Truth. Thus then, without quitting the moral knowledge of common human reason, we have arrived at its principle. And although no doubt common men do not conceive it in such an abstract and universal form, yet they always have it really before their eyes and use it as the standard of their decision. Here it would be easy to show how, with this compass in hand, men are well able to distinguish in every case that occurs what is good, what bad, conformably to duty or inconsistent with it, if, without in the least teaching them anything new, we only, like Socrates, direct their attention to the principle they themselves employ, and that therefore we do not need science and philosophy to know what we should do to be honest and good, yeah, even wise and virtuous. Indeed, we might well have conjectured beforehand that the knowledge of what every man is bound to do, and therefore also to know, would be within the reach of every man, even the commonest. Here we cannot forbear admiration when we see how great an advantage the practical judgment has over the theoretical in the common understanding of man. In the later, if common reason ventures to depart from the laws of experience and from the perceptions of the senses, it falls into mere inconceivabilities and self-contradictions, at least into chaos of uncertainty, obscurity, and instability. But in the practical sphere, it is just when the common understanding excludes all sensible springs from the practical laws that its powers of judgment begins to show itself to advantage. It then becomes even subtle, whether it be that in chickens, with its own conscience, or with another claims respecting what it is to be called right, or whether it desires for its own instruction to determine honesty, the worth of actions, and in the later case, it may even have as good a hope of hitting the mark as a philosopher, whatever can promise himself. Nay, it is almost more sure of doing so, because the philosopher cannot have any other principle, while he may easily perplex his judgment by a multitude of considerations foreign to the matter. and so turn aside from the right? Would it not therefore be wiser in moral concerns to acquiesce in the judgment of common reason, or at most only to call it philosophy for the pure purpose of rendering the system of morals more complete and intangible, and its rules more convenient for use, especially for disputation, but not so as to draw off the common understanding from its happy simplicity, or to bring it by means of philosophy into a new path of inquiry and instruction? Innocence is needed a glorious thing. Only on the other hand, it is very sad that it cannot well maintain itself and is easily seduced. On this account, even wisdom, which otherwise consists more in conduct than in knowledge, yet has need of science, not in order to learn from it, but to secure for its precepts admission and permanence. Against all the commands of duty, which reason represents to man as a deserving of respect, he feels in himself a powerful counterpose in his wants and inclinations, the entire satisfaction of which his sums under the names of happiness. Now reason issues its commands unyieldingly, without promising anything to the inclinations, and, as it were, with disregarded contempt for these claims, which are impetuous and at the same time so plausible, which will not allow themselves to be suppressed by any command. Hence there arises a natural dialectic disposition to argue against these strict laws of duty and to question their validity, or at least their purity and strictness, and if possible to make them more accordant with our wishes and inclinations, that is to say, to corrupt them at their very source and entirely to destroy their worth, a thing which even common practical reason cannot ultimately call good. Thus, it is common reason of man compelled to go out of its sphere and take a step into the field of practical philosophy, not to satisfy any speculative want, which never occurs to it as long as it is content to be more sound reason, but even on practical grounds, in order to obtain it information and clear instruction respecting the source of its principle, the correct determination of its opposition to the maxims which are based on wants and inclinations, so that it may escape from the perplexity of opposite claims and not run the risk of losing all genuine moral principles through the equivocation into which it easily falls. Thus, when practical reason cultivates itself, there insensibly arises in a dialectic which focuses it to seek aid in philosophy, just as happens to it in its theoretical use. And in this case, therefore, as well in others, it will find rest nowhere but in a thorough critical examination of our reason. So that was the first section of Immanuel Kant, a translation from common rational knowledge of morality to the philosophical. I'm going to leave it there. And next time I'm going to do section 2. And maybe at the end, I'll do the preface for anybody that doesn't know Immanuel Kant's work. It's very interesting. And it begs to differ an open conversation about happiness and implied laws and the will. Arthur Schopenhauer digs deep into Kant's work, and they both ping pong off of each other with the will and how it's exercised and how one thinks and what the will is in its essence in man, and how man uses his will in different ways. So I find it very interesting. And it works into its my rant in the beginning wove itself into this big time. It's just nice when people are considerate of others and uses wordings that implies appreciation and gratitude. I hope all of you enjoyed this first section. And until the next time, sending you love and light. I hope all of you enjoy. Morgan Cat is right here. That's why I'm reading that way. Have a great week. And I'll see you on the next one. Bye.